欢迎。
我是黄立成。
我是黄伟彤。
我是周维谦。
在住の3名の方々がお亡くなりになられました。
昨日は全国で25人の死亡が発表され、1日としては最も多くなりました。
Around the world, economies are crumbling. Since the coronavirus outbreak, the price of every vital commodity has fallen.
As countries around the world begin to ease their coronavirus restrictions, a lot of people are wondering whether or not we'll go back to the way life was and the world was before the coronavirus.
那今天我们要公布就是我们新增10个境外移入的案例。
So the aggregate demand will shift left because the households and firms will decrease their consumption. So the pandemic will cause the aggregate demand to shift to the left. So the output and price level will decrease and fall below the long-run equilibrium. The aggregate supply will also shift left, but only a little bit. However, in the long run, the recession will remedy itself and the aggregate supply will shift to the right.
And the government could use the monetary policy to increase the money supply, or the fiscal policy to increase government purchase, and this will increase the money supply and make the interest rate decrease. This will make the aggregate demand shift right, increasing the quantity of goods and services and solve the short-run economic fluctuation.
The government has put 60 billion into the market in response to the pandemic. 40 billion of the 60 is put into a relief package to help small and medium-sized enterprises suffering from the pandemic. 20 billion of the 60 is put into buying more masks and medical equipment, increasing the government purchase and making the aggregate demand shift right.
The monetary policy will increase the money supply, so the interest rate will decrease. This will make households and firms increase their consumption, causing the aggregate demand to shift to the right.
From American farmers producing soya beans or pork to car manufacturers and Chinese factory workers making our electronic gadgets, these are the people and businesses bearing the brunt of the trade war.
What we're looking at here is a long-term contest for primacy in the world economy.
Because we can't continue to allow China to rape our country, and that's what they're doing. It's the greatest theft in the history of the world.
It's war, but not with tanks and guns. This time, tariffs and Twitter feeds, the ammunition.
We aren't looking at a broad and deep market sell-off. We're looking at all of the majors off by some 2% or more.
By early July 2018, there were negative and positive results already showing up in the economy as a result of the tariffs, with a number of industries showing employment growth while others were planning on layoffs. Regional commentators noted that consumer products were the most likely to be affected by the tariffs. The timeline of when costs will rise was uncertain, as companies had to figure out if they would sustain a tariff hike without passing on the cost to consumers.
China will have to retaliate because President Xi Jinping cannot afford to appear that he allows himself to be bullied by the Trump administration.
Overnight, 200 billion worth of Chinese goods hit with an extra 25% of import taxes. This even as he simultaneously described talks with the Chinese president as candid and constructive, and said his relationship with President Xi was very strong, but not less strong. The next day, the Beijing bashing ramped up. "I know I'm going to win, and I love collecting big tariffs," Trump tweeted, and continued with the warning to President Xi. "China will be hurt very badly if you don't make a deal, and China should not retaliate. It will only get worse." But they did retaliate. An official saying this:
"China will never surrender to external pressure. We have the determination and the ability to safeguard our legitimate rights and interests. China has to take countermeasures."
Nobody's a winner in a trade war, and while the US economy and manufacturers will inevitably take a hit, China arguably stands to be worse off given the sheer volume of products it exports to the US, roughly 4 times as much as trade going in the opposite direction. Now, the Chinese economy was already slowing, but a protracted trade battle could potentially make things worse. And ironically, if things get worse for China, then the US and the world economy suffers too. So it's in everybody's interest that the two sides agree some form of deal.
Many foreign businesses have reduced investments in China and increased investments in the USA. The increase in investments causes the demand for loanable funds to shift to the right. Therefore, it increases the real interest rate. The increase in real interest rate causes the net capital outflow to decrease. The decrease in net capital outflow shifts the supply of the dollar to the left, and the tariff which reduces the import increases the net export and causes the demand for dollar to shift to the right. So it appreciates the dollar. To summarize, real interest rate increases, net capital outflow decreases, real exchange rate increases, net export increases. Many foreign businesses have reduced investments in China and increased investments in the USA. The decrease in investment causes the demand for loanable funds to shift to the left. Therefore, it decreases the real interest rate. The decrease in real interest rate causes the net capital outflow to increase. The increase in net capital outflow shifts the supply of the dollar to the right, and the tariff from the US, which reduces the export, decreases the net export and causes the demand for dollar to shift to the left, so it depreciates the dollar. To summarize, real GDP increases, overall price increases, nominal exchange rate decreases. No, I do not agree with Donald Trump. Because US investment increases, the foreign capitals will flow into the US, which means that net capital outflow decreases. Because net capital outflow equals to net export, the net export will decrease as well. So Donald Trump's belief that net export will increase is not correct.
Quantitative easing is a monetary policy whereby a central bank buys government bonds or other financial assets in order to inject money into the economy to expand economic activity. Standard central bank monetary policies are usually enacted by buying or selling government bonds on the open market to reach a desired target for the interbank interest rate. However, if a recession or depression continues, even when a central bank has lowered interest rates to nearly zero. A situation known as the liquidity trap, the central bank may implement quantitative easing. So here's the graph describes the liquidity trap. An increase in the money supply doesn't always cause lower interest rates. In a liquidity trap, monetary policy can't reduce interest rates because they are already at the lower zero bound rate. If interest rates stay the same, we don't get an outflow of money. The global stock market crashed on 2008. Central banks lowered interest rates by so much that they were practically zero, but banks were still unwilling to lend. With QE, central banks print money to buy corporate bonds and long-term government bonds. Print money to buy bonds, so the money supply grows fast. More money in the world means more spending, which speeds up the economy, boosts share prices because both investors and companies have more money to invest. But it weakens a country's currency so that its exports are cheaper to foreigners. This improves sales and hence the profitability of local companies. So here's the graphical analysis. When the money supply growth, the interest rates will lower, and thus it will speed up the economy because more firms or households will invest more.
Stocks in Europe soared this morning following the big news we got overnight. A deal has been worked out to help resolve Europe's debt crisis.
When Greek voters go to the polls on June the 17th, the world will be watching. The election could usher in a government bent on scrapping the terms of its bailout programme, and that could in turn force Greece out of the euro.
And they did it. But European leaders and their top financial advisors were hammering out details long past the deadline. It was after midnight when they finally emerged with a hard-won deal that follows a lot of political sniping and even violence. There were riots in Rome and Athens after demonstrations by workers whose standard of living is bound to take a hit. There was even a fist fight in the Italian parliament. But today, in the early morning hours, finally an announcement that would calm world financial markets.
The so-called European debt crisis is a sovereign debt crisis in some country in the Eurozone, triggered by the U.S. subprime mortgage crisis. Of course, the U.S. financial crisis is only a fuse, and the essence of the problem lies in the excessive debt of the government of these countries. At the time of the incident, foreign capital suddenly stopped flowing into countries that depend on foreign loans. And the crisis was exacerbated by the inability of this country to resort to devaluation. The devaluation of their domestic currencies to make export products more competitive in foreign markets. Based on the common monetary policy, borrowing countries believe that even if Greece cannot repay the debt, the other major economy parliament in the euro area intervened to repay. Therefore, the 5 European big countries have proposed higher and higher deficit expenditure plans. The U.S. financial crisis has pierced the economy bubbles of some countries in the euro area. The government had to issue debt to borrow money to stimulate the economy and maintain expenditures. However, as a result of excessive debt borrowing, one day suddenly it was found that the debt was unsustainable. Though the economies of the 5 European big countries are relatively small, the EU system has framed the economies of various countries, resulting in a chain reaction triggered by Greek debt indebtedness, which has affected Italy, Spain, Portugal, and Ireland. Since the outbreak of the European debt crisis in 2010, a comprehensive discussion of the causes of the crisis has generally originated from 3 major driving forces: poor fiscal discipline, too high fiscal deficit, sudden lack of liquidity, too high private financial leverage, credit restriction, weak economy competitiveness under the fixed exchange rate system in the Eurozone, etc. At the beginning of the crisis, the European Central Bank misdiagnosed the disease in the euro area as overconsumption by the government. and then prescribed a fiscal austerity prescription. But this prescription made the situation in Italy and Spain worse, and various countries began to tighten their finance. Their economy growth began to slow down. Some countries' banking system also experienced problems, and borrowing costs began to soar. In order to solve banking problems, the government had to borrow money at a higher cost to help the banking industry had result in a vicious circle. Due to the economic crisis, the net capital outflow will become higher, so the whole net capital outflow curve will shift to right. In the market for vulnerable funds, the demand curve also includes net capital outflow, so the demand curve will shift to right. As a result, the interest rate increases. At the new interest rate based on the net capital outflow curve, the new net capital outflow quantity is higher than before. Supply curve of the dollar shifts to the right, and the real exchange rate decreases, so there is a depreciation.
He was elected on promises of jump-starting the Japanese economy. Now Shinzo Abe is betting his economic policies will keep him in office.
We've expanded the Japanese economy while the population is shrinking. We've proved that the proper policies make the economy grow.
Since he took office 5 years ago, unemployment has dropped to just under 3%. That's part of an economic plan dubbed Abenomics and based on a three-pronged policy which the Japanese leader describes as arrows.
Talk about the optional two. One is economic. In order to deal with the long-term economic stagflation in Japan since 1991, which also known as lost 20 years, Japanese Prime Minister Abe Jinsan enacted this economic policy at the outset of his second term in 2012. And the three arrows mentioned in economic, the first one is monetary policy, and the second is fiscal policy, and the last one is economic growth strategies. The first one, aggressive monetary policy. The Japanese government expects the Bank of Japan to implement aggressive monetary easing. To achieve this target as soon as possible, the Bank of Japan is buying long-term government bonds and increasing the monetary base, in contrast to previous attempts at an expansionary monetary policy, which mainly focused on buying short-term government bonds. And the second is fiscal stimulus. The government entails new spending programs to stimulate demand and consumption, in order to raise short-term growth and achieve a budget surplus over the long term. And the last one is growth strategy. Over the medium and long term, the Japanese government will take measures to strengthen the competitiveness of the economy, overcome energy constraints, and enhance the innovation platform based on a well-defined growth strategy, such as lowering corporation tax, increasing the labor participation of women, more open to foreigners in society, and lowering trade regulation, while at the same time accelerating the removal of domestic institutional obstacles, including regulation. And then I'm going to show you how these three arrows can save the Japanese economic through the graphical analysis. Before the monetary easing, the Japan economic is in stagflation, and the quantity of output is recession, and the price level is inflation. And after the monetary easing, when the Bank of Japan increased the money supply in the market, the money supply will shift to the right, and then the equivalent interest rate will fall. And when the interest rate falls, reducing the cost of borrowing for investment, and then the quantity of goods and service demand at each price level will increase, shifting aggregate demand to the right, and this will save the economy from recession. And the second is before the fiscal stimulus, and the situation is the same as the first one. The Japanese economy is facing recession and inflation, and after the fiscal stimulus, the increase in government spending shifts the aggregate demand curve to the right, and this will save the economy from recession. And then the last one, before the structural economic reforms and growth strategies. And the last one, before the structural economic reforms and growth strategies. The situation of Japan economic is as same as the two questions I mentioned before. It's facing recession and inflation. And after the structural economic reforms and growth strategies, the increase in investment from the private sector shifts the aggregate demand curve to the right, and this will save the economy from recession. And this is the end of our group quiz. Thanks for your lesson.